My name is Ben Kessler, and for 3 years I've been raising my twin daughters alone in a farmhouse that still echoes with their mother's laugh. Every pitying look I deflect with the same tired joke. No woman in her right mind wants to be mom to twins by morning. Last Wednesday, the quiet speech therapist who's been coaxing words back into June's mouth didn't smile. She stepped closer and whispered, "I've waited a lifetime." That single sentence cracked a door I had bolted shut the day the sheriff came to my door. For 3 years, this farm had been a fortress. Just me, Macy, June, and the silence where their mother's voice used to be. I told myself I was protecting my girls from ever being hurt again, but Claire had been standing in my blind spot the whole time. Night shifts at the hospital to finish a degree she never bragged about. Christmas gifts left on the porch signed from an elf, and a quiet kind of patience that had been stitching our broken pieces back together right under my nose. The moment her whisper hit the air, I knew I'd been a fool, but I had no idea how much I was about to learn. To understand what that whisper did to me, you have to know who I was before Claire ever walked into our lives. I was a man who had stopped believing in mornings. For 3 years, I woke up in the same farmhouse where I had once fallen asleep with my wife's head on my chest. The sheets on her side of the bed hadn't been changed since the night before the accident. I know that sounds crazy, but grief makes you hold on to things that don't make sense. That faint smell of her shampoo was the only proof I had left that she existed, and every morning when I opened my eyes, I had to remember all over again that she was gone. Maggie died on a Tuesday, October 17th, 2019. She had taken our old pickup into town to grab groceries for the girl's third birthday party. A semi ran a red light on County Road 12. The sheriff said she never saw it coming. I was home stringing up paper balloons in the kitchen when the phone rang. Just like that, I was a 32-year-old widower with twin daughters who still believed their mother was coming back with cake. Macy and June, identical in every way except one. After the accident, June stopped talking. Not a word, not a whisper. The doctors called it selective mutism, triggered by trauma. She would look at me with those big gray eyes, the exact same shade as Maggie's, and I could see the words trapped inside her like birds in a cage, but nothing came out. We tried 3 different therapists in the first 2 years. None of them got anywhere. June would sit in their offices, small and silent, clutching a stuffed rabbit that Maggie had given her the week before she died. And I would sit in the waiting room, drowning in the helplessness of a father who couldn't reach his own child. Then Claire Hartman showed up. She was new to the school district, a speech-language pathologist who had moved to Millbrook from a bigger city. No one knew much about her. She rented a small apartment above the hardware store and kept to herself. When the school assigned her to June's case, I didn't expect much. I had learned not to, but the first time Claire knelt down in front of my daughter, she didn't push a workbook or a card set. She just sat on the floor and started humming a lullaby. June's eyes flickered, a tiny spark. I saw it. Claire looked up at me and said 4 words, "She's still in there." That was the moment something cracked. Over the next 18 months, Claire became a quiet constant in our lives. Twice a week, she'd come to the farmhouse after school. She never judged the mess. She never flinched at the silence that hung over our dinner table like a fog. She just kept showing up. And slowly, painfully slowly, June started to come back. First, a whispered yes, then a tiny laugh. Then one afternoon, standing in front of the chicken coop, she pointed at a hen and said, "Brown." I cried harder than I had since the funeral. But here's the thing I was too blind to see. While Claire was healing my daughter, she was also quietly weaving herself into the fabric of our lives in ways I didn't notice. Every Christmas morning, a wrapped box would appear on the porch, addressed to the twins. The tag always read from an elf. Inside, handmade dolls or knitted scarves. I thought it was one of the neighbor ladies being kind. On the mornings after June had a nightmare, Claire would somehow show up early with fresh muffins from the bakery and a calm smile. I told myself she was just dedicated. I never let myself wonder why a woman with no family of her own would spend her evenings learning sign language so she could teach June a way to talk with her hands when words were too hard. I never asked why she was always available, always patient, always there. Because if I asked, I might have to feel something. And feeling was the one thing I had sworn off. I buried myself in the farm. I fixed fences that didn't need fixing. I planted extra rows of corn just to keep my hands busy. And whenever someone, a well-meaning teacher, a friend's wife, even my own sister, suggested I might think about dadding again, I had my armor ready. No woman in her right mind wants to be mom to twins by morning. I said it so often it became a reflex. The joke was a shield. It let people laugh and back away without the awkwardness of pity, but it also kept anyone from getting too close. Claire heard me say it a dozen times, at school pickup, at the farmer's market, at parent-teacher conferences. Every time she would look at me with an expression I couldn't read and then turn back to the girls. I thought she was uncomfortable. I thought she agreed with the sentiment. I was a fool. Last Wednesday, the air had that sharp autumn bite that reminds you everything is about to go dormant. School pickup was chaos as usual. Kids shouting, parents rushing, bus engines rumbling. I was leaning against the tailgate of my truck, watching June and Macy chase each other around the maple tree near the fence, their laughter cutting through the noise like a song I never thought I'd hear again. Claire came up beside me, her bag slung over her shoulder, her brown hair escaping its ponytail. She had that quiet way of standing, present but not intrusive. We talked about June's progress, the new articulation exercises, the breakthrough with the R sound. Then, without really thinking, I made the joke. It was tired and automatic, like spitting out a sunflower seed. No woman in her right mind wants to be mom to twins by morning. Claire didn't smile. She didn't roll her eyes or shake her head. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint lavender of her soap, and her hand brushed mine on the cold metal of the tailgate. When she spoke, her voice wasn't much louder than the wind. I've waited a lifetime. The world didn't stop spinning, but my chest did. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Her eyes, green with flecks of gold I had never noticed, were steady and wet. This woman, who had been nothing but professional and gentle and invisible to my grieving heart, was trembling. All those anonymous gifts, the early mornings, the late nights, every silent act of love I had been too broken to see, crashed over me like a wave. I had been so busy building walls that I never noticed she had been planting a garden right outside. I didn't know what to say, so I did what I always do when I'm scared. I asked a question. "Claire, what are you telling me?" She pulled her hand back and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller. For a woman of 34, she carried a weight I hadn't seen before. "I'm telling you that I've been in love with you for 2 years. I'm telling you that those gifts weren't from some elf. I'm telling you that I took night shifts at County General, not just to pay off my student loans, but because driving past your farm at 3 in the morning and seeing the light on in your kitchen made me feel less alone in the world. And now I'm telling you the hardest part." She paused, her voice breaking. "I'm leaving Millbrook at the end of the month. I got a job offer in Denver, a good one. I figured if I didn't leave now, I'd spend the rest of my life waiting for a man who sees me as nothing more than his daughter's therapist." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there frozen, one hand still resting on the tailgate, the other hanging useless at my side. The school pickup chaos swirled around us, unseen now, unheard. All I could see were those green eyes holding mine with a vulnerability I had never allowed myself to recognize. She pulled her bag higher on her shoulder and took a step backward, ready to retreat into the ordinary life she had carved for herself in this small town. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. And then the twins crashed into my legs. "Daddy," Macy shouted, "we found a caterpillar." June held up her cupped hands, showing me the fuzzy brown creature with silent pride. By the time I looked up from their beaming faces, Claire was gone. The crowd had swallowed her. I spent the drive home gripping the wheel, listening to the girls chatter about bugs and snack time, while my mind replayed every second of that conversation on an infinite loop. I've waited a lifetime. What kind of man doesn't notice a woman building a life around him? What kind of fool mistakes love for professional dedication? That night, after I tucked the girls into their twin beds and pressed a kiss to June's forehead while Macy demanded a third story about a brave pony, I sat alone in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Maggie and I had toasted our first harvest with cheap champagne. The same table where I had fed two bobbies in high chairs while she beamed with exhaustion. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old text messages from Claire. Confirmation of therapy appointments. questions about June's sleep patterns. A note from 2 Christmases ago left a little something on the porch. Hope the girls like them, from an elf. I had never even asked her to stay for hot chocolate. I didn't sleep. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I found myself on the porch staring at the dark outline of the county road. That was the hour Claire had driven past night after night, leaving the hospital, looking for my kitchen light. I thought about her small apartment above the hardware store, the one she had never let me visit. I thought about the degree she had funded with graveyard shifts and the sacrifices she had made in silence. And I realized I had no idea who she really was. I only knew the woman who showed up, gave everything, and asked for nothing. When the sun came up, I made a decision. I called my sister, Lydia, and asked her to watch the girls. She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't argue. I drove into town, past the diner, past the church, and parked in front of the hardware store. The narrow staircase on the side led to a single door. I climbed it and knocked before I could lose my nerve. She opened the door wearing a faded college sweatshirt and jeans. Her hair was loose, her face bare. She looked younger and more tired than I had ever seen her. Her eyes widened when she recognized me. Ben, she didn't invite me in. She just stood there, hand on the doorframe like she was bracing for impact. So I spoke first. I need to know everything, not the therapist version. Not the polite version. I need to know who you are, Claire, and I need to know why you're really leaving. For a long moment, I thought she would close the door. Then her shoulders dropped. She stepped aside and let me enter. The apartment was spare and spotless, like a hotel room someone had been living in temporarily for 2 years. A single bookshelf held textbooks and a framed photo of my girls. Not me. Just Macy and June, laughing in the garden, a picture I had sent her once. On a small table by the window there was a box. Inside I saw the handmade dolls, the knitted scarves, the tiny notes with loopy handwriting, the evidence of a love I had been too blind to acknowledge. Claire sat on the edge of her sofa and wrapped her arms around a cushion. Her voice was steady but quiet. I didn't grow up with what you had, Ben. My parents died in a car crash when I was 6. I spent the next 12 years bouncing between foster homes. Some were kind, most weren't. When I graduated and got a scholarship, I promised myself I would build a real family someday. Not just get married, but create a home. The kind with messy kitchens and bedtime stories and laughter that lingers. Then I met Macy and June. And you? She looked at me then, eyes rimmed with red. You were a mourning husband who had given up on joy. And your daughters were these fragile, beautiful souls who needed someone to hear them. I told myself I was just doing my job. But then June said her first word in 2 years while I was holding her hand. And you stood there crying, and I realized I wasn't just falling in love with the girls. I was falling in love with all of you. I crossed the room and knelt in front of her. I'm sorry, Claire. I was so wrapped up in protecting myself that I couldn't see you. You've been here, right in front of me, the whole time. She shook her head, a tear escaping down her cheek. You made that joke over and over. No woman in her right mind wants to be mom to twins by morning. I heard it like a door slamming shut every time. I told myself I was crazy to wait. So when the Denver offer came, I thought it was my sign to stop hopping. I took her hands. They were cold and trembling. I'm terrified, I admitted. Maggie was the only woman I ever loved. Letting go of that grief feels like letting go of her. And if I'm honest, I don't know if I can be the man you deserve. But I know this. The thought of you leaving town feels like losing my family all over again. Not just because of the girls, because of me. She looked at our joined hands. I haven't pushed you, Ben. I never wanted to be the reason you felt disloyal to her memory. But I'm not asking you to forget her. I'm asking you to make room for something new. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I've waited my whole life for a family. I can't wait for someone who isn't ready to have me. Before I could answer, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it and her face went pale. The subject line of the email was visible. Final offer, response required within 48 hours. She pulled her hands away and stood up, walking to the window. They need my answer by Thursday. I've already delayed twice. If I say no, the job goes to someone else. And if I say yes, she didn't finish the sentence. I rose and moved behind her, not touching, just close enough to feel the tension radiating off her. Then we fight for this, Claire. Give me those 48 hours. I'll prove to you I'm not the man who made that joke. I'm the man who's standing here right now asking you to stay." She turned, and for a heartbeat, hope flickered in her eyes. But before she could speak, a knock at the door shattered the moment. It was Lydia, face pale. "Ben, you need to come home. It's June. She's had a nightmare and won't stop crying for you." I hesitated, looking at Claire. She nodded toward the door. "Go. Your girls need you. We can finish this later." I squeezed her hand once and ran down the stairs. By the time I got home and soothed June back to sleep, the sun was already high. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. Because within hours, the rumor mill in Millbrook had ignited. Someone had seen me entering Claire's apartment, and someone had seen us holding hands through the window. By noon, the whispers had reached the school board, and by dinner, an anonymous complaint had been filed with the state licensing board questioning Claire's ethics. A speech therapist engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a patient's parent, the kind of accusation that could end her career. But the real bombshell came from a source I never expected. My late wife's mother, Diane, called that evening. Her voice was cold and sharp as broken glass. "I've heard about your therapist girlfriend, Ben, and I want you to listen closely. If you continue this relationship, I will sue for custody of my granddaughters. You're a farmer with a failing operation and questionable judgment. A judge will see a widow father bringing strange women around his traumatized daughters. I will not let you replace my daughter with some charity case." I stared at the phone, heart pounding. Diane had never approved of the farm, never approved of me, but she had kept her distance since the funeral. Now she had found her weapon. I hung up without answering. Macy came into the kitchen, pulling on my sleeve. "Daddy, I don't want Miss Claire to leave. She makes June smile, and she makes you smile too. You haven't smiled in a long time." I knelt down and pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair. That night after they were asleep, I sat with my head in my hands, the walls of the farmhouse pressing in. My wife's memory, my daughter's stability, the woman I was falling for, all colliding in a disaster I had no idea how to untangle. And then a soft sound broke the silence. June was standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She looked at me with those gray eyes, the same eyes that had been silent for years, and she opened her mouth. She said a single sentence. Her first full sentence since before the accident. "Don't let her go, Daddy." Then she climbed into my lap and fell asleep. I held my daughter as tears streamed down my face. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't going to lose anyone else. Not Claire, not my girls, and not myself. But Diane was already on her way to the courthouse. And the clock was ticking. The morning after June spoke, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The sun wasn't even up yet, but I was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote down everything Diane had said on the phone, every threat, every cold syllable. Then I wrote down the things that mattered: my daughters, their laughter in the yard, Claire's hand on the tailgate, June's voice breaking through 3 years of silence. I wasn't going to let fear win, but Diane wasn't bluffing. By 9 o'clock, a process server was walking up my gravel driveway. I watched from the window as he handed me a thick manila envelope. Emergency petition for temporary custody and restraining order. Diane had filed in family court, requesting immediate custody of Macy and June, and a restraining order preventing Claire from being anywhere near my children. In her affidavit, she claimed I was emotionally unstable, recklessly exposing the girls to a woman of questionable character, and that the farm was a financially failing, unsafe environment. She attached photos she had somehow obtained of Claire's apartment building, captioned with words like "unsuitable living conditions for minors." She included a statement from a concerned parent at the school alleging that Claire had shown favoritism toward my daughters. It was a full-blown character assassination. My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't just a threat, it was a legal war. If she got even a temporary order, Claire would be legally barred from seeing us, and the girls could be placed with Diane until a full hearing. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Roger Ellison, who had handled the estate after Maggie died. He read the documents and his voice was grim. "Ben, she's playing hardball. She's got influence in this county. You need to take this seriously. I'm going to file a response today, but you need to prepare for what she's going to do next." The next thing she did was visit the farm herself. That afternoon, a black sedan pulled up and Diane stepped out, dressed in a tailored gray suit, her silver hair pulled back like a helmet. She didn't knock. She walked around the house, inspecting the barn, the fence, the garden. When I came out to confront her, she turned with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm simply documenting the conditions for the court, Benjamin. The peeling paint, that broken fence board, the lack of a modern security system. A grandmother has a right to be concerned." I told her to leave. She got back in her car and drove away, but not before pausing to look at the twins playing near the maple tree. Her expression was ice. That night, Claire called me. Her voice was steady but exhausted. "The licensing board investigation has been expedited. They're coming to interview me tomorrow. If they find any evidence of unprofessional conduct, I could lose my license. And Denver has heard the rumors. They gave me an ultimatum. I either accept the job by noon tomorrow and confirm there are no pending ethical issues, or the offer is rescinded." She paused, and I heard the tears in her throat. "Ben, I don't know if I can fight this. I'm so tired." I drove straight to her apartment. This time, I didn't knock. She opened the door and I pulled her into my arms. She broke down, sobbing against my chest. All those years of strength, of pouring love into my broken family, and I had never seen her cry. I held her until her breathing slowed. Then I said, "Tomorrow we fight. Not separately, together. I'm not losing you because of my mother-in-law's vendetta. We'll face the board, and we'll face the judge, and we'll face Denver. But first, I need you to know something. I love you, Claire. I should have said it the moment you whispered on that tailgate. I love you, and I'm done hiding." She looked up at me, her green eyes searching my face. Then she kissed me. Not a desperate storm kiss, but a soft, certain one that tasted like salt and hope. When we pulled apart, she nodded. "Okay, together." The next morning, the first battle was at the school district office. The licensing board investigator, a stern woman named Ms. Hendricks, sat across from Claire and me in a sterile conference room. She had a file folder thick with documents. Diane had not only made a complaint, she had supplied alleged evidence. There was a screenshot of my truck parked outside Claire's building for 2 hours the day before. There was a note Claire had written to June after a therapy session. "You are so brave. I'm always here if you need me." Diane's lawyer had highlighted "always here" as proof of inappropriate emotional entanglement. I wanted to laugh and scream at the same time. Claire answered every question with grace. She explained that our relationship had developed over the past 18 months within professional boundaries, and that we had only acknowledged romantic feelings 2 days earlier. She provided documentation of her 2-year history of anonymous gifts as simple acts of kindness, not grooming. She submitted character references from teachers and parents. I testified about the timeline, about my own blindness. Ms. Hendricks listened, took notes, and finally closed the folder. "I'll be honest, Miss Hartman. This complaint appears retaliatory. However, the board takes any allegation seriously. I will recommend dismissal, but the process will still take a week. Until then, you are on paid leave. Denver is another matter that you'll have to handle yourself." Claire called the Denver recruiter immediately after. I stood beside her as she spoke into the phone. She explained the situation honestly, including that she was now in a relationship with a single father. There was a long pause on the other end. Then the recruiter said, "We value integrity. The ethical complaint appears unfounded, but we need the final determination before we can officially clear you. We'll extend your deadline by 1 week. After that, the offer will be withdrawn." Claire thanked him and hung up, letting out a breath she'd been holding for days. But while we were handling the professional fallout, Diane was already moving on the custody front. Roger called and told me the emergency hearing had been scheduled for Monday morning, just 4 days away. He also told me something that made my blood run cold. "Ben, Diane has hired a private investigator. He's been digging into Claire's past. I don't know what he's found, but I've heard rumors. You need to prepare yourself." That evening, Claire and I sat in my kitchen while the girls slept upstairs. I told her about the pie. She went quiet, twisting her hands in her lap. Then she said, "There's something I haven't told you, Ben. It's not a secret exactly, but it's something Diane will use. When I was 19, I was engaged. His name was David. He was killed in a car accident 2 weeks before our wedding. I had just aged out of foster care. Losing him shattered me. I spent 6 months in a psychiatric hospital. I was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety. I've been in therapy ever since. I'm stable, I'm healthy, but the records are there. If Diane finds them, she'll paint me as someone who's mentally unfit to be around children. I took her face in my hands. Listen to me. You are not your past. You are the woman who gave my daughter her voice back. You are the reason I'm still standing. I don't care about old medical records. I care about who you are now. She cried and I held her, and we both knew that Diane would twist it into something ugly, but it didn't change the truth. The next day, we went on the offensive. Roger filed a counter-motion, arguing that Diane's petition was frivolous and malicious, and that her actions constituted harassment. We submitted affidavits from neighbors, Sebastian the old farmer, Rosa from the market, Father Thomas, and even June's pediatrician, all attesting that I was a good father and that Claire had only ever been a positive influence. Roger also filed a motion to compel Diane to disclose any evidence from the private investigator, arguing that if she was going to make fitness claims, we had a right to see her evidence. But Diane had one more card to play. On Sunday, the day before the hearing, a social worker arrived at my door. An anonymous tip had been called in to Child Protective Services, alleging that the twins were living in squalor, that I was neglectful, and that an unrelated adult female was frequently staying overnight. I let the social worker in. She walked through every room, checked the refrigerator, inspected the girls' beds. She interviewed Macy, who chattered happily about her room and the chickens, and June, who looked at her and said, "My daddy takes care of me. Miss Claire helps me talk." The social worker left with tears in her eyes. She told me at the door, "I see no cause for alarm. I'll be recommending no further action. But whoever called this in knew exactly where to hurt you. I knew who it was. Diane was scorching the earth." And then came the real revelation. Roger called late that night. "Ben, I found out why Diane is doing this now. She's not just upset about Claire. 3 months ago, Maggie's life insurance policy had a clause. If the beneficiary remarries within 5 years of the insured's death, a portion of the payout reverts to the contingent beneficiary. That contingent beneficiary is Diane, and if she gets custody of the girls, she controls the entire remainder. It's about money. It always was." I stared at the wall. Maggie had set up that policy without me even knowing the fine print. Diane had been sitting on this information, waiting for me to move on so she could pounce. And now, with Claire and I publicly together, she saw her chance. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. We all gathered at the courthouse. Claire wore a simple blue dress, her hand in mine. Roger stood beside us. Across the aisle, Diane sat with her lawyer, smirking. The judge, a woman named Judge Harding, read the petitions and affidavits. She listened to Diane's attorney paint me as a reckless father and Claire as a mentally unstable interloper. She heard Roger's passionate rebuttal, the testimony of Father Thomas, who had driven in to speak on our behalf, and even a video statement from June, recorded by the social worker, saying she wanted Miss Claire to be her mommy. The room was silent. Judge Harding set down her glasses. This court sees many family disputes, but rarely one so clearly driven by financial incentive and personal animosity. "Mrs. Redmond, your petition is denied. The temporary relief you sought is unwarranted. The court finds no evidence of neglect or unfit parenting. Furthermore, I am issuing a protective order against you. You are not to contact the Kessler family or Miss Hartman except through legal counsel. If you continue this campaign of harassment, there will be consequences." Diane stood up, face white with rage. "This isn't over." She stormed out. The courtroom erupted into quiet relief. Claire and I hugged as tears streamed down her face. Father Thomas clapped me on the back. But we all knew this was only one battle. The licensing board still had to finalize dismissal, Denver was still waiting, and the rumors had already scarred our small town. That evening, we returned to the farmhouse. The girls ran to greet us, Macy asking if we won, June simply hugging Claire's legs. I looked at the woman beside me, the one who had waited a lifetime, and I knew what I had to do. I didn't need a court to tell me what my family was. I knelt down right there in the kitchen in front of the girls and the wood stove and the memory of Maggie smiling from a photo on the shelf. I took Claire's hand. "Claire Hartman, you waited for me. You healed my daughter. You loved us when we couldn't love ourselves." I don't have a ring yet and I don't have a plan, but I have a certainty I haven't felt since I lost Maggie. I love you. Will you be my wife? Not someday. Soon. Before the harvest. Before the snow. I want this house to be yours. I want these girls to call you Mom. I want the waiting to be over. Claire's answer was immediate, choked with happy tears. Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The twins squealed and launched themselves at us, and for the first time in 3 years the farmhouse felt whole, but the story wasn't finished. Because out in the dark, Diane was already making a new plan, and the Denver job deadline was now 3 days away. The biggest test was yet to come. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. The farmhouse buzzed with a strange energy, part celebration, part war room. Lydia had stayed to help with the girls, and she and Claire had started planning a wedding that didn't yet have a date. I watched them at the kitchen table, sketching flower arrangements and laughing about something silly, and I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known was still possible. But the Denver deadline loomed over everything like the dark clouds before a storm. Claire had said yes to me, but her career, her future, the life she had worked so hard to build, all of it was hanging by a thread. On Tuesday morning, the licensing board made it official. Ms. Hendricks called Claire and read the final determination. The complaint was dismissed in its entirety, with a formal finding of no ethical breach. The board had determined that the anonymous tip and Diane's evidence constituted retaliation and harassment. Claire was cleared to return to work immediately. She sat on the edge of my bed when she got the call, and I watched her shoulders drop as if a physical weight had been lifted. She was free, but the Denver offer had its own urgency. If she stayed in Millbrook, she would be leaving that opportunity behind, and a small rural school district could never match the salary or resources. We talked about it late into the night, about whether she wanted the city job or the life we were building here. She said she had spent her whole life chasing stability. What she really wanted was a home. The Denver job was just a path. The farm, the girls, me, that was the destination. On Wednesday morning, she made the call. I stood next to her as she dialed the recruiter. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, her voice steady and sure, "but I've decided to stay in Millbrook." The recruiter was surprised but gracious. "There will always be other candidates," he said, "but there's only one you. We wish you the best." When she hung up, she turned to me and smiled. "That's it then. I'm staying." I kissed her and whispered, "You just gave up a big job for a farmer with 2 kids and a bunch of chickens." She laughed. "I didn't give up anything. I chose my family." That same day, Diane made her last move. Roger called with an urgent update. She had gone to the county clerk and tried to file a motion to void the insurance clause based on a claim that I had already been secretly cohabitating with Claire before the 5-year mark, a violation that could theoretically trigger the reversion. She had presented a timeline cobbled together from social media posts and a fabricated witness statement from a farmhand I'd fired 2 years earlier for drinking on the job. The clerk had rejected the filing on technical grounds, but the intent was clear. She was never going to stop unless we stopped her. Roger suggested we pursue a permanent injunction and possibly a civil suit for malicious prosecution. I agreed. Enough was enough. We filed the paperwork that afternoon, and the judge granted an expedited hearing. 2 weeks later, in the same courtroom where she had tried to take my daughters, Diane Redmond was ordered to pay our legal fees and was permanently barred from contacting any member of our family. She stood up and left without a word. I never saw her again. The insurance that had once been her weapon now remained untouched, a fund for the girls' college education, just as Maggie would have wanted. The real turning point, though, came in a quieter moment. A week after the court victory, I was clearing out the old cedar chest in the attic, looking for a quilt my mother had made. I found a small wooden box I didn't recognize, tucked behind a stack of blankets. Inside was a letter, sealed in an envelope with my name on it in Maggie's handwriting. It was dated 2 months before the accident. My hands were shaking as I opened it. She wrote about the life we had built, the girls, the farm. She said she had a strange feeling she couldn't explain, a need to write down what she'd never say in person. And then the part that stopped my breath. "Ben, if you're reading this, something has happened. I don't want you to be alone. I don't want our girls to grow up thinking love died with me. Promise me you'll open your heart again. Find someone who sees the man I married, the good and stubborn and gentle man. And when you do, tell her I said thank you. Not from some distant cloud, but from wherever I am, I'll know. I'll be glad you're not alone. I sat on the attic floor and wept for the first time in years, not from grief, but from a kind of sacred permission. Maggie had known me better than I knew myself. I brought the letter downstairs and showed it to Claire. She read it with tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the box. "That's the most beautiful gift anyone could give me," she said. She wasn't afraid of a ghost. She understood that loving me meant loving the memory of Maggie too, and that there was room for both. We set the wedding date for the first Saturday in October, 2 years to the month from the day Claire had first walked into June's therapy room. The farm had never looked so beautiful. We strung lights from the barn to the maple tree, and Father Thomas agreed to officiate right there in the field where I had once considered myself a broken man. Lydia was Claire's maid of honor. Rosa made the cake. Sebastian brought apple cider from his orchard. The whole town showed up. The same ones who had once whispered now brought gifts and hugs and apologies. June was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle scattering petals, and she said, clear as a bell, "For Mommy." She meant Claire. When Claire appeared in a simple ivory dress, her brown hair loose and wild, I lost my ability to speak. I stood there like a fool, watching this woman who had been invisible to me for so long walk toward our future. The ceremony was short, the way we wanted. Father Thomas spoke about second chances, about the harvest that comes after the drought, and about a love that waits without demanding. Then he looked at me. "Ben, I believe you have something you'd like to say." I took Claire's hands and I said the words I had rehearsed 100 times. "Claire, 3 years ago, I was a ghost in my own life. You came into our broken world and you didn't try to fix it with force. You just sat on the floor and hummed a lullaby. You waited. And when the time was right, you whispered the words that brought me back to life. I know you waited a lifetime for this family. I promise you, for the rest of my life, you will never wait again." She kissed me before I could finish, and the crowd cheered. That evening, as the sun set behind the wheat field, the girls ran around the yard chasing fireflies, their laughter a melody that had once seemed lost forever. Claire and I sat on the wooden bench I had built under the maple tree, the same bench where I had carved our initials into the back. She rested her head on my shoulder and sighed. "Do you remember the joke you used to make?" I groaned. "Don't remind me." She smiled. "No, listen. You'd say no woman in her right mind wants to be a mom to twins by morning. And I'd think, well, I've never been in my right mind about you." I laughed and pulled her closer. "You waited a lifetime," I said. She turned to look at the house where the kitchen light was glowing and the sound of Macy's giggles drifted through the open window. "No," she said. "I was waiting for this exact moment, and it was worth every second." A month later, Claire found the receipt. She was organizing the old desk in the study when she pulled out a yellowed piece of paper from the back of a drawer. It was a receipt from a gas station, dated October 17th, 2019, the day Maggie died. On the back, written in ballpoint pen that had faded, were Maggie's last scribbled words. "Don't forget the cake." And beneath it, a different handwriting, one I didn't recognize at first. "She was thinking of you until the very end. I'm a stranger, but I was there. God bless your family." The note had been placed on the windshield of the wrecked truck by a first responder who had never found the courage to deliver it in person. It had fallen between the seats and was only discovered when the truck was salvaged months later. I had never looked inside that vehicle again after the accident. The receipt had been tucked away by a grieving man who couldn't bear to read it and forgotten. All these years, it had been waiting, just like Claire. I showed it to her and she held it like it was holy. "Sometimes the universe leaves us breadcrumbs," she said, "and sometimes it takes a long time for us to find them." That night we sat the girls down and told them the story of how we met. Not the whole story, but enough. June curled up in Claire's lap and said, "I'm glad you waited, Mommy." Macy added, "Yeah, because now we have a mommy and a mommy angel." I looked at Claire, my wife, my partner, my love. The farmhouse that had once echoed with silence was now full of voices, of laughter, of a future I had never dared to imagine. The joke I had used for armor was finally retired, because a woman in her right mind had stepped forward, whispered her truth, and made a family whole. And I, the man who had stopped believing in mornings, woke up every day grateful that she had waited a lifetime for us. What does it mean to wait a lifetime? For Claire, it wasn't passive hopping. It was showing up, year after year, for a broken man and two little girls who didn't know they needed saving. It was leaving gifts signed from an elf, driving past a dark farmhouse at 3 in the morning, and loving without any guarantee of return. That kind of patience is rare. But here's the truth. Most of us are so busy defending our wounds that we miss the quiet angels already in our orbit. Ben's joke was a fortress, and it almost cost him everything. The question isn't whether you've been hurt. It's whether you'll recognize the love that has been waiting for you all along, the kind that doesn't announce itself with grand gestures but with whispered truth on an ordinary afternoon. Maybe there's someone in your life right now who has been showing up in ways you've refused to see. Maybe the wall you built to keep out pain is also keeping out your future. This story isn't just about a farm in Oregon. It's about the courage to let the armor fall, to believe that after loss can come something sacred, and to understand that the best things in life aren't the ones we chase. They're the ones that have been quietly choosing us, day after day, while we were looking in the wrong direction. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to hope again. And if you want more true stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary love against all odds, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss another. Because sometimes the most life-changing words aren't shouted. They're whispered. I've waited a lifetime.